To delve into one of the most frustrating, dark, and media-frenzied mysteries in the annals of true crime, we must travel to the region of Northern California, a territory that was shaken by the terror of a serial killer who, unlike other criminals of the era, did not seek anonymity, but fervently desired public recognition, playing a macabre game with police forces and the media through phone calls and ciphered letters. This is a story where the criminal's arrogance surpassed any known limit, openly defying investigators and leaving an indelible mark on popular culture, a real-life plot where the obsession with fame and the inability of authorities intertwine to give life to an authentic legend of terror that is often compared to the cases of Jack the Ripper, the Cleveland torso murderer, or the Axeman of New Orleans. The official chronology of the confirmed attacks began on the night of Friday, December 20, 1968, specifically on the borders of the town of Benicia, on Lake Herman Road, an isolated spot commonly known as a gathering area for young couples. That night, two teenagers named David Arthur Faraday, 17 years old, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16 years old, were enjoying what was their first formal date and had parked their vehicle in a secluded crossroads on the road around 22 hours and 15 minutes. The young people had altered their initial plans to attend a Christmas concert at Hogan High School, stopping beforehand in that secluded spot to talk, laugh, and be alone in absolute peace, without suspecting that from the brush a motionless presence was staring intently at them in the darkness of the roadside. Minutes after 23 hours, an unknown vehicle pulled into the crossroads and parked right next to them violently. The aggressor descended from his car carrying a firearm, a .22 caliber pistol loaded with Super X brand ammunition, and upon approaching, brutally ordered the young people to get out of the automobile. Given the initial reluctance of the victims and to intimidate them, the attacker fired several warning shots through the windows and the roof of the car, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. As David Faraday attempted to exit through the door, the attacker shot him at point-blank range, hitting him directly in the head, just above the left ear, causing his death almost instantaneously. Witnessing the tragic scene, Betty Lou Jensen opened the opposite door and tried to flee desperately, running down the paved road, but the killer cold-bloodedly raised his weapon and shot her 5 times in the back from a distance of just a few meters, falling lifeless onto the asphalt at an exact distance of 9 meters from the vehicle. The bloodied bodies were discovered a few minutes later, around 23 hours and 26 minutes, by a neighbor of the area named Stella Borges, who was returning to her home by car, observed the silhouettes on the roadside, and gave immediate notice to local police patrols after driving at high speed. The initial investigation was placed in the charge of Detective and Sergeant Les Lundblad, of the Solano County Sheriff's Office, who along with forensics collected an exact total of 9 .22 caliber bullet casings. Despite the efforts, meticulously examining the car for fingerprints and interviewing several witnesses from the highway, authorities failed to gather any solid leads. The motive of economic robbery was completely ruled out as belongings were found intact, and forensic analysis ruled out any sign of an assault of a sexual nature. On a strictly ballistic level, the ammunition consisted of copper-coated projectiles manufactured by the Winchester Company from October 1967, but the barrel of the weapon used did not print rifling with sufficient molecular definition, which invalidated any comparative ballistic match in the future. The second confirmed attack occurred 6 months later, specifically in the early morning of Saturday, July 5, 1969, in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, a location situated about 4 kilometers away from the first crime scene. Parked there in a brown Corvair vehicle were a 22-year-old woman named Darlene Elizabeth Farron and her companion, a 19-year-old youth named Michael Renaud Mageau. Around 12 o'clock at night, a car positioned itself behind them, blocking their exit and turning off its lights, driving away from the location at high speed only to return barely 10 minutes later to consummate the plan. On this second occasion, the driver parked laterally, descended from his vehicle carrying a powerful flashlight with which he completely blinded the young people through the window and, without uttering a word, began to shoot at them using a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, a legendary Luger. The attacker fired multiple shots at point-blank range, shattering the windshield and piercing the bodies of both young people in the face, neck, chest, and extremities. As he was preparing to return to his automobile upon hearing the groans of pain from Michael Mageau, who in an act of pure survival had tried to protect himself in the back seat, the killer retraced his steps with total coldness and shot 2 more times at each of them before getting into his car and fleeing the scene definitively. At 12 hours and 40 minutes of that same morning, the switchboard of the Vallejo Police Headquarters received a telephone call made from a public booth located at Tuolumne and Spring Streets, just a few blocks from the sheriff's office and very close to Darlene Farron's own home. The operator who answered the call, switchboard operator Nancy Slover, heard a male voice, slow, monotonous, and of an extreme coldness that pronounced textually the following words. "I want to report a double murder. If you travel 1 mile east on Blue Rock Springs Road, you will find 2 kids in a brown car. They were attacked with a 9mm pistol. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The police traced the booth immediately, but the caller had already vanished into the night, leaving the receiver hanging meticulously to retain the switching system loop and buy time for his escape. Michael Mageau miraculously managed to survive the terrible wounds to his face, neck, and torso, becoming the first eyewitness capable of providing a preliminary physical description of the aggressor, describing him as a white man, heavyset, approximately 1 meter and 75 centimeters tall, of a robust build, round face, an estimated age between 26 and 30 years old, and with short, brown, military-style hair and eyeglasses. On the contrary, Darlene Farron was declared dead due to internal hemorrhages caused by the 9 projectiles that severely affected her lungs and pierced her heart. Subsequent investigations by detectives John Lynch and Ed Rust revealed that Darlene's husband received anonymous calls with heavy breathing that very morning, before officially learning of his wife's passing, raising suspicions of prior stalking and a detailed knowledge of her routines and friendships. The case took a turn of absolute madness on August 1, 1969, when the editorial offices of three of the main newspapers in the region, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, simultaneously received three identical letters handwritten in blue ink by the killer himself. On the envelopes, which lacked a return address and carried several postage stamps pasted on, the author began with the phrase, "Dear Editor, I am the killer of the two teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl in Vallejo." In these letters, riddled with deliberate misspellings, the criminal provided meticulous details about the type of weaponry used, the brand of Super X ammunition, the position of the bodies, and the number of shots fired, data that only the police and the perpetrator could know. Each letter was accompanied by a third part of a complex cryptogram that totaled 408 characters composed of abstract symbols, zodiac signs, meteorological characters, and inverted letters of the alphabet. The killer strictly demanded that the fragments of the code be published on the front page of the respective daily newspapers before Friday afternoon, threatening that, otherwise, he would cruise the area all weekend killing any lonely person he found on the street until completing a total of 12 victims in his macabre harvest. The editors, after consulting with Vallejo Police Chief Jack Stiltz, agreed to the publication to prevent a public massacre. A few days later, on August 7, 1969, a new multi-page letter arrived at the San Francisco Examiner that would mark the definitive baptism of the criminal, as it began for the first time with the iconic greeting, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The 408-character cryptogram was finally decoded manually by a high school teacher couple from the town of Salinas named Donald and Betty Harden, who discovered that the hidden message did not contain the real identity of the killer, but rather a disturbing statement of intent that said textually, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die I will be reborn in paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collection of slaves for my afterlife." The final 18 letters of the cryptogram were left without a coherent philological resolution, resulting in a chaotic sequence used as filler to complete the block symmetrically. The third confirmed attack occurred on the afternoon of Saturday, September 27, 1969, on the shores of Lake Berryessa, in Napa County. Two university students named Brian Calvin Hartnell, 20 years old, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22 years old, were relaxing, reading, and resting on a remote peninsula of the lake. Past 18 hours, they observed the approach of a man whose attire instilled absolute terror, a theatrical and macabre staging. He wore a type of black executioner's hood or tunic, square cut, which completely covered his head and torso down to the waist, with clip-on sunglasses superimposed over the eye slits and a large cloth bib sewn onto the chest that displayed painted in white color the symbol of a cross inscribed inside a circle of about 12 centimeters in diameter, the official signature of the Zodiac. The individual approached carrying a gun in his right hand and a large double-edged hunting knife sheathed at his waist. The aggressor assured them in a calm voice that he was an escaped convict from a Montana prison, where he had supposedly killed a guard, and that he only needed their money and vehicle to flee to Mexico. After demanding that Cecilia Shepard firmly tie Brian Hartnell's hands with pieces of white plastic rope that he himself provided on the ground, the killer bound the young woman thoroughly by the ankles and wrists, then tightened Brian's bonds brutally after tossing their wallets. At that instant, the Zodiac declared with total coldness that he was going to have to stab them and, without the slightest hesitation, began to plunge the hunting knife into Brian Hartnell's back repeatedly, inflicting a total of 6 deep stab wounds that severely affected his lungs. Right after, he turned savagely on Cecilia Shepard, inflicting multiple puncture wounds to her chest, abdomen, and back while the young woman writhed in pain on the ground, begging for her life. Once the bloody attack was consummated, the killer walked at a measured pace to the victim's car, a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, and using a thick-tipped felt pen, wrote directly onto the paint of the driver's door the exact details of the assault. Vallejo 12-2068, 7-4-69, September 27-69 6:30 by knife, sealing the text with his characteristic crosshair symbol. At 19 hours and 40 minutes, the criminal made a new telephone call to the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a public booth at a car wash service station of the firm Napa Car Wash, confessing to the crime to the officer on duty with a tone of utter contempt and superiority. Brian Hartnell managed to survive the severity of the attack after spending weeks in intensive care and was able to describe the meticulousness of the bonds, the prints of Wing Walker brand footwear found in the mud, and the coldness of the Zodiac's tone of voice. But Cecilia Shepard passed away 2 days later in the hospital due to the gravity of her internal injuries and the massive hemorrhages that collapsed her body. The fourth and final confirmed murder of the official chronology signified a radical shift in pattern, as it was not committed in a rural area against a young couple, but in the urban heart of San Francisco. On the night of Saturday, October 11, 1969, a 29-year-old taxi driver named Paul Lee Stein picked up a passenger at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets, in front of the City Theater, destined for the residential neighborhood of Presidio Heights. Upon reaching the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, the passenger ordered him to stop the vehicle a bit past the corner and, suddenly, drew a 9mm firearm, firing a single shot at point-blank range into the back of his head, causing his instant death on the spot. Three teenagers who were in a house situated right across from the scene witnessed the crime through a second-floor window and immediately alerted the San Francisco police. The witnesses described how the killer took the necessary time to search the taxi driver's pockets, seize his wallet, the vehicle keys, and use a knife to cut a large rectangular piece from the back of Paul Stine's blood-soaked cotton shirt before wiping down the steering wheel and the taxi door frame with a handkerchief and walking away calmly in the direction of Presidio Park. Due to a glaring communication error at the police switchboard, operational patrols initially received the description of a suspect of an incorrect racial origin, which led to two officers patrolling the area by car, Don Falk and Eric Zelms, crossing paths directly on the street with a white man of robust build, dark jacket, and glasses who perfectly matched the real characteristics of the killer. But they allowed him to continue on his way since they were looking for a different suspect. According to the radio notice received, losing the golden opportunity to capture the monster. 2 days after the crime, the editorial office of the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from the Zodiac that dispelled any doubt about authorship, since inside the envelope was enclosed an authentic, blood-soaked piece of Paul Stine's shirt. In the text, the killer explicitly mocked the incompetence of the San Francisco officers, saying that they had crossed paths with him and could have captured him if they had carried out a proper search in the park instead of letting him walk away freely. From that moment on, collective psychosis gripped California, especially when the Zodiac threatened in subsequent letters to place a bomb on a school bus and blow up children on their daily route, which prompted school vehicles to be permanently escorted by police cars and armed officers in an unprecedented deployment. Throughout the following years and until 1974, the killer continued to send more than a score of letters to authorities and the press, including new cryptograms such as the one named Z32 or the Z13, which began with the phrase "my name is," followed by 13 characters that have never been resolved with total scientific certainty by government cryptographers. The second massive cryptogram, known as the Z340 code, could not be solved until the year 2020 by an international team of amateur cryptographers integrated by Jarl van Eyck, David Orenchak, and Jamil van Cruyff, confirming that it did not contain the real name of the criminal either and prolonging the mystery of his identity. In his communications, the Zodiac came to claim authorship of a total of 37 fatalities, being linked at a police level with unofficial cases with circumstantial clues but without conclusive binding. Among them, the shooting deaths of Robert Domingos, 19 years old, and Linda Edwards, 17 years old, which occurred on a beach near Lompoc on June 4, 1963, considered a direct operational antecedent due to the great similarity of the attack against isolated couples. He was also linked to the stabbing murder of Sherry Jo Bates, 18 years old, on October 30, 1966, at Riverside Community College, whose body was found practically decapitated by the fury of the attacker, a case where the Zodiac himself asserted his authorship in the south of the state and reporter Paul Avery found typographical matches in anonymous notes kept in police archives. Another peripheral case of great impact was the complaint of Kathleen Johns, 22 years old, who stated that on March 22, 1970, a man sabotaged the wheel of her car on Highway 132 near Modesto, only to then hold her under psychological threats for 3 hours along with her baby inside a vehicle from which she miraculously managed to escape by jumping out while it was moving into the brush, subsequently identifying her captor upon seeing the composite sketch at the Patterson police station. Finally, the mysterious disappearance of Nurse Donna Lass, 25 years old, which occurred on September 26, 1970, in South Lake Tahoe, linked to the case after the Chronicle received a postcard in March 1971 hinting that she was his 14th victim, a file whose jurisdictional conflicts slowed the initial investigation until 1986 when a skull was found near Highway 20, positively identified through complex mitochondrial DNA analysis in the year 2023 as belonging to Donna Lass, closing a painful unknown of more than 50 years. The list of suspects investigated by the San Francisco Police Department, the FBI, and the Sheriff's Office of Napa and Solano counties exceeded thousands of names throughout decades of frustration, highlighting mainly 3 figures before investigative bodies. The first is Arthur Leigh Allen, the only suspect publicly named by authorities against whom the judicial inspectors of the case, led by the celebrated detectives Dave Toschi and Bill Armstrong, obtained formal search warrants for his properties and his trailer. Allen was a former Vallejo schoolteacher expelled from teaching for inappropriate conduct and arrested for child abuse offenses. Circumstantial suspicions were massive, as he owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch whose logo was exactly the circle with a cross, used the same caliber of ammunition, his footwear matched in size with the prints at Lake Berryessa, wore a ring engraved with the letter Z in a 1972 interrogation, and several acquaintances stated that before the crimes he spoke of the idea of killing couples at random with a flashlight attached to the weapon and calling himself Zodiac. Furthermore, during the biennium of 1971 to 1973, a period in which the letters ceased, Allen was stationed abroad with the armed forces. However, all collected biological and scientific evidence played in his favor, since his fingerprints did not correlate with the blood prints from the taxi. FBI experts from the graphological units determined that his handwriting did not match the letters, and DNA analysis of the saliva on the stamps came back negative, with Allen passing away in 1992 from complications of a kidney disease without ever being formally indicted by the grand jury. The second suspect of great relevance in recent times is Gary Francis Poste, a U.S. Air Force veteran and house painter who passed away in 2018 at 80 years of age. In October 2021, an independent civilian organization named the Casebreakers, led by Tom Colbert, publicly claimed that Poste was the real killer, denouncing that the FBI secretly included him as a primary suspect in 2016 but failed to act properly due to institutional and bureaucratic neglect. The civilian group argued that Poste presented skin scars on his forehead identical to the lines reflected in the classic composite sketch of the taxi driver, that removing mathematically the letters of his name within the structures of the letters brought forth hidden messages, and that a former student declared that Poste led a clandestine hunting group and bragged about escaping the police in San Francisco. Likewise, they claimed to have unearthed compatible weapons and animal remains near his former residence. Faced with the media coverage, official FBI spokespersons categorically denied the closure of the case, clarifying that the investigation remains open due to a lack of definitive biological evidence confronting his DNA with the preserved fluids of the original cause. The third suspect investigated in depth was William Joseph Myers, following testimonies from a close friend named Kenny who claimed that Myers studied at the same high school as victims David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, worked at the same restaurant where victim Darlene Farron served, and also had access to the same type of military boots whose Wing Walker footwear print was located at the tragic scene of Lake Berryessa. In the same manner, during the period from 1971 to 1973 in which no Zodiac letters were registered, Myers was stationed abroad with the Army. According to testimonies gathered from his surroundings, Myers supposedly confessed to attacking the couples due to a bad romantic breakup with his girlfriend, but despite the story presenting credible elements to be thoroughly investigated, the officers assigned to the case remained skeptical in the total absence of conclusive physical evidence against him that would sustain a criminal trial. When analyzing this historic case closely, it becomes evident that we are facing the birth of a new type of criminal monster, an individual who understood before anyone else the power of the media and the manipulation of public opinion to amplify terror, using encryption not just as an intellectual game, but as a psychological shield to humiliate police departments that were uncoordinated and limited by the jurisdictional boundaries of the era, a systemic failure that allowed the killer to vanish into the California fog. Decades after the written communication ceased, the criminal file of the Zodiac Killer remains officially open in California headquarters and in the registries of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, receiving an average of one new lead per week and shaping the most famous, enigmatic, and destructive unsolved case in contemporary criminal history, an open challenge that continues to defy modern forensic science. Thank you very much for joining me in this deep, rigorous, and respectful analysis on our channel. If you value investigative journalism that seeks the truth behind great mysteries and want us to keep giving a powerful voice to stories that deserve to be told with justice, do not forget to show your support. Subscribe so you don't miss any of our investigations, leave your like on this video, and share it on your social networks so this story reaches more people. Remember to activate the notification bell to stay up to date with our upcoming premieres. I am John Crime, and we will see each other very soon in the next story of Deep Human Darkness. Stay safe and see you soon.